Greetings YouTube, this is Societygear, and let me welcome you to another video from applifestyle.org, your one-stop shop for everything rideshare and delivery alike. This is going to be part 3 of the Ubereats Advanced course, which is activity scenarios. Now I'm going to have a lot of fun with this. Now, unless you're dumber than a box of rocks, you probably already came to the conclusion that Ubereats has different waves of activity. By activity, I mean the frequency at requests, the rate requests are coming in, okay? So sometimes it's real fast, it's coming in smooth, sometimes it's slow. You know, there's different things that contribute to that, which we're gonna talk about. But before we get into the activity scenarios, we'll just cover what brings about them. So what influences the rate which Ubereats pings come in? Well, obviously the two biggest things. Well, everything else is a combination of these two. One is the customer demand. Are people ordering? I mean, if people aren't hungry, they have no reason to fill their stomachs and they're too lazy to get out the house, then that means that you have nowhere to go. The second one is how many drivers are on the road or fleet. So there may be demand, but let's say me and my whole family and you and your whole family is on there too, on the platform. And guess what? That's going to affect the activity too. So anytime it's slow, then that means one of those, at least one of those two is out of whack. People aren't ordering or the fleet is saturated. I mean, at any given time, it could be any one of those two, or it could be both. But out of those factors, give us the activity scenarios. Because generally speaking, the time of day can influence the activity. Like in the previous Ubereats course, part 5, we covered how the time of day is pretty critical. Because people are not ordering, guess what? You have nothing to do. And that'll happen during certain times of the day, like in between lunch and dinner time, between 2 and 5. It's going to be slower than obviously lunchtime when people are hungry, dinner time when people are hungry. And yeah, with that being said, let's go ahead and hop into it. Another thing to mention before we jump right into it, major events also affect activity too. So a popular place in my market is the American Airlines Center. If they're hosting a game or something, that could affect activity because the people are there eating stadium hot dogs instead of at home watching Netflix and ordering falafel off Uber Eats. So that being said, let's get into it. Now there are 5 activity scenarios, and the higher the number on the list, the more they drop in quality. Now, based on the activity scenario, that's going to determine how long you wait at a restaurant, if you wait at all, and also how picky you're going to be in terms of picking your pings. Because I want you to think about this for a sec. If Uber is so busy that you can't even wait half a second before getting your next request after you already declined the first one, maybe you get to be very, very, very picky because you got an abundance of requests coming in, right? Under those scenarios, I wouldn't take anything that I didn't want to take. And we're going to get into that. So activity 1, or activity scenario 1, I call it the Uber is getting their butts kicked scenario. This is the scenario where they're sending you pings all over across from the city, and it's so busy, like the interval between pings is like maybe 5 seconds, 10 seconds. It is under a minute, okay? That's how busy they are. So under those circumstances, I'm only taking something that meets my criteria that I need. Piggybacking off from the last video, remember how we talked about trip types? Well, guess what? I just got me a long trip. I need a short trip now, and guess what? I'm not taking nothing unless it gives me a short trip. Or it has the highest likelihood of giving me a short trip. How would I know? Because I've categorized the restaurants based on the trip types. So I'll keep declining until I get a restaurant that I know has the highest probability of giving me that short trip. Or vice versa. I want me a long trip, I'm doing the same thing. Same thing for medium trips. During this activity scenario, the driver has the most control. And it's just like, picture being in a drought in the desert and then you come across a waterfall. That's the equivalent to how it is for drivers. At least it is for me. But I just explained to you why it's so valuable. Now the downside to this type of scenario is since it's so packed, they will be sending you, the algorithm, expands in terms of pulling drivers like a reverse sonar wave. We covered that in part 2 of the normal Ubereats course. So you will get stuff from like across the city trying to pull you. You might get a little irritating to keep declining those, but just remember that you're gonna get what you need eventually. Like that's a scenario where you don't want to just take the first thing that drops back at you. And another way to kind of filter through that, once you finally get on a request, remember how when we covered back-to-back trips, the algorithm kind of filters out those across the city requests for you. That way you can just kind of keep going without having to deal with that. So you could actually get around that con in that way. But that's activity scenario 1. Activity scenario 2, pings are coming in a faster rate than normal. A minute or 2 between pings. At the most, a good deal of time, back-to-back trips occur with the occasional stack trip. I forgot to mention this about activity scenario 1, but back-to-back trips happen almost all the time, and stack trips happen very frequently. Doing that scenario, you might want to think about if you're going to take a stack trip, because etc. But in activity scenario 2, it's still busy. It's not the highest level of activity, but it is more than the normal rate. So you can still afford to be pretty picky. I mean, in this type of activity, usually orders aren't floating out trying to pull you across the city. So it does have that advantage in comparison to activity level 1, but obviously 1 is going to obviously be better because you have more variety of restaurants and things to pick from. Like under this scenario and under scenario 1, you really think I'm going to be waiting at a restaurant? Probably not. I mean, the standard rules apply in terms of wait time. For me, I'll give them 5 minutes, and that's only if I know the restaurant normally has their stuff together. They're capable of getting it done in 5 minutes. Now, restaurants where it's questionable, I'm not going to take it. I mean, look at all this activity. Why would I? I'm just going to be sitting there wasting time, and time is money, so it'd be stupid just to sit there. And that's why certain restaurants, they get X'd off the map in general, but they get X'd off the map for the time being. But yeah, doing this level of activity, great level of activity, be picky with what you take, and obviously don't wait. Next level of activity, standard level of activity, or activity scenario 3. Standard level of activity takes about 5 minutes after completing a trip to get a ping with the ever so occasional back-to-back trip. So this is what I consider just a normal level of activity, okay? Doing Ubereats, it's about 5 minutes after you complete a trip to get your next ping. In the normal level of activity, I'm still pretty picky, but I do kind of keep a mental note of how long it's taking to get a request. Like if it does go past 5 minutes of me like declining requests, then I'll start to go ahead and take something which I wouldn't normally take. In terms of waiting, doing a normal scenario, since time is more stretched in between trips, I'm actually less likely to take a request from a restaurant that may not have their stuff together. Because like in the other 2 scenarios, believe it or not, waiting may be slightly more appropriate for a simple fact that you don't have any time in between trips. So let's say you want to catch a little break in real quick, you could do that. Or like sometimes waiting 5 minutes isn't so bad because you don't have any downtime. Like you're going from trip to trip to trip to trip to trip. In the normal scenario, well, guess what? You will have downtime. So downtime coupled with wait time means you're going to get less requests in that hour. And less requests in that hour generally means you're going to make less money. So restaurants, they kind of struggle with wait time. I would avoid them and really only do restaurants that they're usually on their stuff. Okay. Now, activity level 4. This is where we start getting into the slow activities. It is slower than usual. Pings come around 10 minutes after trip completion. Oh, that's, sometimes it happens. Usually, this happens during the slow times, between dinner rush and lunch rush. Maybe between like the overnight and dinner, like between 12 and midnight. Usually that's when you start encountering this type of scenario. Or like during like major events like Thanksgiving or Christmas and people aren't ordering. And in some cases, the fleet may be oversaturated. Good example is sometimes Thanksgiving break in like the month of January, because the reason the fleet would be oversaturated. In the month of January, you got college students that back home. They hop on these apps to make some extra grip while they're home. That's one. And number two is the college students are not at school, okay? So you got to remember, since Ubereats is available to Uberexers too, they're usually busy taking college students from all over the place. They don't have that activity, so a lot of them will start taking Ubereats requests to kind of supplement that lack of activity for that month. That's an example of like the fleet being oversaturated. And plus, business conferences kind of slow down during that time of year. So that goes or covers activity scenario 4. Generally speaking, doing activity scenario 4, this is a good time to crack open that audio book or like stuff that you would do when it is slow. Maybe you have a magazine in your car or something to read, because you may be sitting at your hotspot for a minute. But activity scenario 5, it is unusually slow. It takes longer than 15 minutes to get a ping, usually due to circumstances out of your control like holidays or major events that are affecting customer demand. It's like activity level scenario 4, fleet saturation, oversaturation can be the reason that it brings about that. But usually the 5th one, customer demand is affected in some way. So usually during the 5th scenario, you may actually want to evaluate, is it best to do Ubereats that day? Sometimes it may be more constructive to do something else. This is the one that, like I mentioned on the channel before, how I have a backup app, Postmates. If activity level 5 is in play and I'm out there, well, that's the scenario where I'll start switching between Postmates and Ubereats. But generally speaking, activity scenario 5, I'll probably go back home and do something more constructive with my time. It's important to note that these activity scenarios, you can experience like all 3 within a day, or the whole day can be one activity. It fluctuates based on different times, and also the date depends on influences too. Because the beginning of the week is slower than the weekend. So Monday it's kind of medium, but like Tuesday, Wednesday is going to be slower. Then it picks up Thursday, then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, it's popping. So that contributes to these too. But generally speaking, the activity scenarios, I evaluate them on an hourly basis. Okay, so every hour it kind of resets. If that makes any sense. What I mean by that is I'm doing dinner time. So between 5 and 6 is the activity scenario 2. Okay, great. But between 6 and 7, it starts over. So what's the activity scenario? I'm always identifying what the activity scenario is, because that's going to determine how I deal with these restaurants. Like there are some restaurants I'll be willing to go to in different activity scenarios. Like activity scenario 3, 4, and 5, or maybe the restaurants I wouldn't normally go to, I might go ahead and go to, because this type of activity is better than none. But doing 1 and 2, and they're not getting put on that list. They're just gonna get passed up on because they don't have their stuff together. That's the value of the activity scenarios. Generally speaking, if you just see a certain, if you see the activity just rise up all of a sudden or drop, and let's say it's 30 minutes within an hour, I keep that in mind too. It's not like strictly on an hourly basis, but I'm always evaluating it so I know exactly, okay, what I want to do and what restaurants I want to take and how I'm going to treat them. Anytime I'm wondering, should I take a certain type of restaurant? The question I ask is, what is the activity scenario? And that'll help me decide if I want to take it or not. And it goes a long way, trust me. So create your own rules and also your own places that you want to go to for these 5 activity scenarios. So like I said, they can fluctuate throughout the day, or you may have a whole day where it's just this general level of activity. You got to be flexible and adaptable like that. And here's where the creative part comes in that we mentioned in fundamentals. So y'all have fun with that. I know I do. But that covers it for this video. Stay tuned for part 4, where we'll be covering boosts and tips. Y'all might be wondering, Elijah, you covered that in the normal course. Well, I'm gonna give you a little insight on. We'll take it a step further. Let's just put it that way. But if you like this video, a like, share, and subscribe is greatly appreciated. Don't forget to hit that bell icon if you're new. That way you can be notified when the next Ubereats course is coming. Ubereats video is coming out. And if you have any questions, leave them below. Be sure to go to the applifestyle.org. Check out the content there. Until the next time, peace out.